Yom Teruah, Yom Teruah blasts. So this means that this is a day of blasts. Now these blasts are announcements, they are alarms. They are calling the nation up, calling a portion of the nation up, and they are sounds, they are music. It is the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Announcements, the Feast of Shofars. This is the feast that is to be on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh, the first of the month, the new moon. Rosh, the head of the month. Now, who is the head of the month? Yeshua is the head of the month. Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, the first of the year, the beginning of the year, Jewish New Year. Now, who is Rosh? Who is the head of the year? The head of the year is none other than Yeshua HaMashiach. He is the head of the year. So traditionally, this is the remembrance of creation. And therefore, these blasts are the blasts of creation. And the blasts of creation, the announcements, are those of Yudhevavhe, who said, "Do not eat of the tree." Then he said, "Where are you?" Adam said, "I am naked." Yudhevavhe said, "Have you eaten?" Adam said, it is my wife that you gave me, so it is you and my wife. And then he said to the wife, "Who is this? What have you done?" And she said, "It is the snake." Then Yudhevavhe cursed the snake. He cursed the woman, then he cursed the man, and then he cursed creation. And creation brought forth thorns and thistles. So this is the remembrance of all of this, the remembrance of the fall in sin, but also the promise that he would crush the head of the serpent, and that the serpent would bruise him in his heel. Now let us study all of this. It also is the day of the remembrance of the Akedah, of the remembrance of Abraham taking Isaac to slaughter. Tishri is the 7th month. 7 is the cardinal number. It is the number that is associated with Elohim, with Yud-He-Vav-He. So therefore it is a holy month, a month dedicated to Yud-He-Vav-He, and certainly a large part of this month belongs to him. Leviticus 23 verse 24 to 25 says, "Tell the people of Israel in the 7th month, the first of the month is to be for you a day of complete rest for remembering. A holy convocation announced with blasts on the shofar. Do not do any kind of ordinary work and bring an offering made by fire to Yud-He-Vav-He." So in the 7th month, the month that belongs to Yud-He-Vav-He, the first of the month, Rosh Chodesh. Rosh, the first, but also the head of the month, Yeshua. In the 7th month, Yeshua is to be there, and he is to be a day of complete rest. Again, this whole concept of resting of our works and doing the works that Yud-He-Vav-He has prepared for us, which is alluded to in Hebrews 3 and 4. So it is to be a day of complete rest for remembering. For remembering what? For remembering what happened at creation. Also for remembering how Yud-He-Vav-He has actually answered that. A holy convocation. Therefore a day of gathering, to be announced with blasts on the shofar. So this is a day of remembrance with blasts on the shofar, for the remembrance of the blasts of the shofar that happened at the first Yom Teruah, because the first Yom Teruah is considered to have been the last day of creation, the day of the creation of man. And then he says, "Do not do any kind of ordinary work and bring an offering made by fire to Yud-He-Vav-He." Again, the concept of a Sabbath, but an offering made by fire, an offering of total dedication, because the offering made by fire is the burnt offering along with the fat offerings. And this is to be an offering of total dedication to Yudhe-Vavhe. Then Yudhe-Vavhe, just after creation, identified a problem. They heard the voice of Yudhe-Vavhe Elohim walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. The voice of Yudhe-Vavhe and the confession of faith, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And you must love him with your whole heart, your soul, and with all your resources. And you must write these laws on your heart, and you must teach them to your children. So there is this concept of the law that is written, that needs to be written on the heart, and the voice of Elohim. So it is the voice that speaks the law. And there is this concept of today when you hear the voice, which comes out of Hebrews 3 and 4. And when do you hear the voice? The voice of Yudhe-Vavhe Elohim walking in the garden. Faith is not a religion. Faith is a way of living. And this way of living is of turning away from the fallen sin and doing so in the presence of God at the time of the evening breeze. Now let us just look at these words. Evening breeze, the evening breeze, the Ruach Yom, the Ruach, the wind, the breeze, also the Spirit. Yom is a day, and evening, a time period, can even be massive time periods, but also continually. So Yudhe-Vavhe came out to walk with Adam in the Spirit continually. And this is highly insightful. So he was wanting to talk to Adam continually. And then it happened. The man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yudhe-Vavhe Elohim among the trees in the garden, because they knew that they had fallen in sin and that they had done what he did not want. But Yudhe-Vavhe clearly also knew this already, because he knows everything, and he's omniscient and he's omnipresent. And then Yudhe-Vavhe called to the man and he said, Where are you? As though he did not know. But he needed to start a conversation, and this conversation can only start if he talked to man, and therefore he said, Where are you? Well, Adam answered and he said, I heard your voice in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself. He was naked? Of course he was naked. There is no talk of him wearing any clothes at this stage, because after creation there is no talk about any clothes at all. So this nakedness is not physical nakedness, but spiritual nakedness. Now, which spiritual nakedness is this? He was supposed to be clothed in the Ruach, and this nakedness, in other words, was the absence of the Ruach, and he hid himself. He hid himself because he knew that he had fallen out with God. And then Yudhe-Vavhe said, Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree from which I ordered you not to eat? Immediately Yudhe-Vavhe pronounced to him what the problem was. He had eaten from the tree. Then the man replied, The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate. So the woman you gave to be with me. It is the woman that you gave me. In other words, it is your fault. You gave me the woman. And then it is the woman's fault. She gave me the fruit. So the blame was shifted away from Adam. And this is the hallmark of all sin. It takes sin and it casts it away from human beings and casts it onto God and onto others. Then Elohim, Yudhe-Vavhe Elohim said to the woman, What is this you have done? The woman answered, The serpent tricked me, so I ate. It's also not she, it is the serpent. And then Yudhe-Vavhe stopped asking questions that would lead to some form of excuse, and he simply spoke to the snake. Yudhe-Vavhe Elohim said to the serpent, Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all livestock and wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust as long as you live. So he was cursed in that he did not have arms and legs, and therefore had to crawl on his belly. And he was to eat dust, so he was to crawl in the dust. But it is also said that Adam is dust and that he will return to dust, because Yudevave made him of the dust of the red earth. So the dust of the red earth is actually his basic physical nature. And our basic physical nature is that of the fall in sin, that of living in sin, of our flesh. And then this what then says that the snake would eat our sin for as long as he lives. So he would live off our sinful nature. And clearly that is what keeps him going at the moment, to eat as much of our sinful nature as he possibly can. And then Yudevave said, and I will put animosity between you and the woman, and between your descendant and her descendant. So this relationship was not going to be a smooth one, because man would also not be happy with this rulership and this eating of the sinful nature from the snake. And therefore there would be animosity between the snake and the woman, and between his descendant and her descendant. And he would bruise the head, and he would then bruise his heel. But this is singular, so this can only point to Yeshua, who would eventually bruise the head of the snake, but then the snake would bruise his heel. Now, why the heel? Why the ikev? Because when you look at the story of Jacob and Esau, Jacob grabbed Esau by his heel, by his ikev, and that is part of his name. His name, Jacob, Yaakov, cheat, supplanter, and he tried to supplant Esau, and this is where the whole problem started off. He tried to replace him, but this means that Yudevave then placed all Yaakov's sin, all human sin, onto Yeshua, and therefore Yeshua carried all human sin, and therefore the whole cheating nature of mankind in his heel, and Satan was to bruise that heel. To the woman he said, I will greatly increase your pain in childbirth. You will bring forth children in pain. Your desire will be towards your husband, but he will rule over you. So the pain of childbirth would take up her whole nature. It would consume her. And then thereafter, the nurture of the children and the education of the children would land mainly on her shoulders, and she would bring forth children in pain. So her attention would be with the children, but her desire would be towards her husband. But she would be so busy, and he would be so busy, that there would not really be good time for a good relationship between them, and therefore he will rule over you. In other words, he will exercise the law over you, and you will be subject to him, because he will rule over you with the law. The little time that he has to be with you will not be a time of loving kindness, but a time of applying the law. To Adam he said, because you listened to what your wife said and ate from the tree which I gave you the order, you are not to eat from it. The ground cursed on your account, and you will work hard to eat from it as long as you live. So because Adam had eaten, the ground was cursed on his behalf, and it would actually oppose the work that he would do to bring food to his household. And this opposition would make it even more difficult to have a meaningful relationship with his wife, and would lead to him being mainly a lawgiver within his house, other than one with compassion, loving kindness, and all the attributes that Yudevave had put in him when he said that he made man in his image. And then he said, it will produce thorns and thistles for you. So the earth would produce thorns and thistles, and the thorns and thistles would then oppose his making the field plants and eating the field plants, because not only would he need to provide the field plants for himself, but also the field plants for his family. and the thorns and thistles would oppose it. Now Yeshua took this onto his head with a crown of thorns when he appeared in front of Pilate. And this crown of thorns then caused his forehead to bleed further, where it had already bled when he was in Gethsemane. You will eat bread by the sweat of your forehead. So it would really be a lot of effort that would have to go into the provision of bread. But this also is a curse that went on to Yeshua as well, as did the thorns, because Yeshua is to give us the spiritual bread that we are to eat, because we are not to live from bread alone, but from every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So this is what we are to do. We are to eat the bread by the sweat of our forehead, but also the bread that Yeshua provides for us, the bread of life. The words that come from the mouth of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh was to be produced in the sweat of his forehead. Now the sweat of his forehead was blood in Gethsemane, and also blood with a crown of thorns. So it means that for him to give us this spiritual food, he had to lay down his life, because the life of an animal is in the blood, and the blood has been given to atone for us until we return to the ground, and until he returns to the ground. For you were taken of it, you are dust, and you will return to dust, as we have already alluded to. Now let's have a look at creation and at recreation. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, Bereshit, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. So everything was there right from the beginning. He created everything, omitting nothing. In the beginning was the Word, in John 1, verse 1-3. So in the beginning, Bereshit, Bereshit. So this clearly is a comment on Genesis 1. It is a comment on creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word, the Torah, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. So the Torah was with Elohim, and the Torah was Elohim. So this becomes very insightful. So the Torah actually becomes God himself, and he was with Elohim in the beginning. He was with Elohim in the beginning. So the Torah now becomes a being, a person, and all things came into being through him. And this person, who is the Torah, is the source of everything that came into being, and without him nothing had being. So this means that he is the instrument of creation. Yeshua is the full instrument of creation, and there is no other. The earth was unformed and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Ruach of Elohim hovered over the surface of the water. Let us just examine this. The sun, the moon, and the stars had not yet been created. So there was no physical light at this stage, and therefore this darkness also clearly was not physical darkness, but it was the spiritual darkness of Satan, who had been thrown out of the eternity into the physical creation, into the temporal realm, into the realm that has space. But time did not yet exist, and the Ruach of Elohim hovered over the surface of the water. So the entire earth was covered with water, therefore was totally inhospitable to man, and the Ruach of Elohim hovered over the water. So Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh inspected the water and saw that there was only darkness there. And then he responded to this in the following way. Then Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So this is the amazing thing. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh says, "Let there be light," and there was light. This light clearly was in existence already, but then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh brings it into creation, into the space of creation, and he says, "Let there be light," and there was light. So this light is in opposition to the darkness that was there, and that was Satan. So Elohim saw that the light was good, and Elohim divided the light from the darkness. So clearly, because Satan is darkness and Yeshua is light, they were divided from each other. They were two separate beings, and Elohim called the light, and the light was good. Clearly the light was good because it was Yeshua. And then he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So what is good is produced mainly in the day, and there is no reason to be shy about producing it, and therefore that is good. And the darkness conceals evil, because the evil that came into creation and is the darkness that came with Satan is committed mainly during the night, and therefore there is night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. See that it says one day, and it does not say the first day. So this is not a day in the sense of the ordinary day, but is a day that existed already before the fourth day, when the sun, the moon, and the stars came into being, and when time came into being. So Yudevave saw that the light was good. But let us see what this light then further means. In Yeshua was life, in him was life, in the instrument of creation, in the Torah was life, and the life was the light of mankind. So Yeshua is the light of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not suppressed it. So Satan will never have victory over this light. He will never have total victory over Yeshua, because Yeshua is eternal. There was a man sent from Elohim whose name was Yohanan, John the Baptist. So he was sent from Elohim, and he came to be a testimony, to bear witness concerning the light. So Yohanan came, and he was supposed to witness to the light. He was supposed to witness to Yeshua, who had been brought into creation to oppose darkness and to win over darkness, so that through him everyone might put his trust in Elohim and be faithful to him. So Yohanan came to point out that man is sinful, and that man needs to put their trust in Yudevave and be faithful to him. In other words, to listen to his voice, to obey it, and have that considered as righteousness to him. He himself was not that light. So Yohanan was not that light. No, he came to bear witness concerning the light. He was the witness of the light. He was to speak of the light. This was the true light, the light that was brought into creation at the beginning of creation. This is Yeshua, which gives light to everyone entering the world. So Yeshua gave this light to everyone entering the world. He was in the world came to be through him, yet the world did not know him. The Hebrew word for world is Eretz. He came to his own homeland. His own homeland, Israel. Hebrew, Eretz Israel. Eretz Israel as the prime example of the world, yet his own people did not receive him. And this is what exactly happened. Israel did not receive him, but as many as did receive him, those who put their trust in his person and power, he gave the right to become children of Elohim. Those who did receive him, who trusted him, who heard his voice, who obeyed it, to them he counted it as righteousness. And the righteous become children of Elohim, not because of bloodline, physical impulse, or human intention. So it's not because of physical descent that people become children of Elohim, but because of Elohim himself, because it is Elohim in people who make them children of Elohim. The Word became a human being and lived with us, and we saw his Shekhinah, the Shekhinah of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. So that this, what seems to be this impersonal law, now has come and has become a human being, and the law has now come and lived with us, because Yeshua is the law. And we saw his Shekhinah, the Shekhinah of the Father's only Son. The scriptures never use the word Shekhinah, they use the word Kavod, which is the glory. So we saw the glory of the Father's only Son, the only Son of Elohim, which was seen, and it was full of grace and truth. So the grace that Yeshua had is he had grace for those who had sinned, but nevertheless he combined it with truth. So that this combination of grace and truth is the work of Ruach HaKodesh, who comes to convince of sin, of righteousness, and of judgment, and therefore brings the truth, but in such a way that we can hear it and can respond to it. Yochanan witnessed concerning him when he cried out, "This is the man I was talking about when I said, the one coming after me has come to rank ahead of me because he existed before me." Yeshua said, this is the one that I was talking about. He ranked ahead of me, and he existed before me. As we have seen, Yeshua is the light that was brought into the creation, into the physical creation, right at the beginning. And therefore, he existed long before Yochanan. His existence was there long, long, long before his physical existence came into being. We have all received from his fullness, yes, grace upon grace. What greater grace is there than that we have the privilege of being clothed in Ruach HaKodesh, in the Holy Spirit, and that we have Ruach HaKodesh in us, who helps us to deal with our sin and with our unrighteousness. For the Torah was given through Moshe, but the Torah is harsh law, but grace and truth, the combination of the soft spoken law that comes through the grace of Yudai Vave, but nevertheless never skirts the truth, came through Yeshua the Messiah. No one has ever seen Elohim but the only and unique Son. So this means that the Word is the only one who has ever seen Elohim, and he is the one who then is the embodiment of the Father, who is identical with Elohim and is at the Father's side. He is identical with Elohim, and therefore he is Elohim and is at the Father's side. He has made the Father known. So this is incredible, this information about Yochanan and about Yeshua. Elohim said, "Let there be a dome in the middle of the water." So there was to be a separation in the middle of the water. Let it divide the water from the water. So there is something special about this division of water, because this division then divides the water above the dome from the water below the dome. Elohim made the dome and divided the water under the dome from the water above the dome. That is how it was. And Elohim called the dome sky. Now, this word for sky can also mean heaven. So it means that there was the water above the heavens, and then the water below the heavens. And the water above the heavens then would be in eternity, because heaven is eternity. So there cannot be any physical water in eternity, and the water that is in eternity is Ruach HaKodesh. It is the Spirit. It is God Himself who is the water above the dome. And then there is the physical water below the dome. The rain, the snow, the sleet, the hail, that all descend from heaven and then actually water the earth so that it can bring forth. So that is above the dome. And it was evening and there was morning, a second day. So once more there is a second day, but this still is before the creation of the sun, the moon, and the stars, which actually determine time. Here is Yochanan's testimony. When the Judeans sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" he was very straightforward and said, "I am not the Messiah." So he was very clear about it, that he was not the Messiah. And they asked him, "Are you Eliyahu? Are you the forerunner of the Messiah? If you're not the Messiah, are you his forerunner?" And then Yochanan, in his humility, said, "No, I'm not." But he probably also did not know. He didn't even think about who he really was. And then he said, are you the prophet, the one we're expecting? So he's not the Messiah, he's not Eliyahu, and he's not the prophet. Now the prophet is the one that was promised by Moses, who would be like Moses. So they said to him, who are you, so that we can answer the people who sent us? What do you have to say for yourself? He answered in the words of Yeshua the prophet, I am the voice of someone crying out, in the desert, make the way of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh straight. So he was saying, I am the precursor of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So he was now answering again that he is Eliyahu, because Eliyahu is the one who would come before the Messiah and would make the way of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh straight. And this is the amazing thing about him, that he was so humble that he didn't say straight that he was Eliyahu, because it is Eliyahu who has to come to make the way of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh straight. The prophet like Moshe, like Moses, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will raise up for you a prophet like me from among yourselves, from your own kinsmen. You are to pay attention to him, just as when you were assembled at Horeb and requested Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim. Don't let me hear the voice of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, my Elohim, anymore, or let me see this great fire again. If I do, I will die. So there was this prophet who was to come, and he would talk to them. And then he needs to get attention, so he needs to be listened to, just as when they were assembled at Horeb. And at Horeb, they also heard the voice of Messiah. They heard the voice of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh as he spoke from the mountain with the trumpets. And that was too loud for them. And then they said that they didn't want to hear the voice anymore or see the great fire again because they were in fear of death. But Moshe said to them that it was so that they would fear Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and not sin. So it means that this voice had come so that they would not sin. On that occasion, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to me, they are right in what they are saying. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their kinsmen. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I order him. So he would be like Moshe, but he would speak to each of them individually, where Moshe was speaking to them collectively. And this means that he was a prophet like Moshe, but he was a prophet to individuals, and not only to the entire nation. And this is different. They were to listen to the words from his mouth, and he would tell them everything that he orders them, so that he could speak to each one personally about that person's sin and unrighteousness. Deuteronomy 18, verse 19 to 22, whoever doesn't listen to my words, which he will speak in my name, will have to account for himself to me. So Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh would speak through Messiah, and everyone would have to listen to him. And if they do not listen and obey, then they will have to account. So it will carry judgment. But if a prophet presumptuously speaks a word in my name, which I didn't order him to say, or if he speaks in the name of other gods, then that prophet must die. Because a lying prophet is blaspheming God. It's blaspheming Elohim. You may be wondering, how are we to know if a word has not been spoken by Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? So there is this question about how does one know that a word spoken did not come from Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? And then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh answers himself. When a prophet speaks in the name of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and the prediction does not come true, that is, the word is not fulfilled, then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh did not speak that word. So there is an obligation that rests on a prophet, and that is to be absolutely sure that what they say comes from Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and doesn't come from themselves. The prophet who said it spoke presumptuously. You have nothing to fear from him. So that a person who speaks presumptuously actually is blaspheming and is not doing what Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh wants them to do. Comfort my people, comfort and keep comforting my people, says Elohim. Tell Yerushalayim to take heart. Proclaim to her that she has completed her time of service, that her guilt has been paid off, that she has received at the hand of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh double for all her sins. So there is this comfort that is to come to Israel, and this comfort is to comfort Israel. It is to bring Israel peace, and the comfort and the peace of Israel both are Yeshua and Ruach HaKodesh. So they are to bring peace, they are to bring shalom, the perfection in every facet of their lives to Israel, and they will be comforted. Then, because the reason the comfort and the shalom will come to them is because they have received from Yudhevavah double for all their sins. And a voice cries out, clear a road through the desert for Yudhevavah, level a highway in the Arava for our Elohim, level a highway in the desert for our Elohim. And that is what Yochanan the immerser came to do. Let every valley be filled in, every mountain and hill lowered, the bumpy places made level, and the crags become a plain. So everything was to change, to be what Yudhevavah wanted it to be. Then the glory of Yudhevavah will be revealed. All humankind together will see it, for the mouth of Yudhevavah has spoken. A voice says, proclaim, and I answered, what should I proclaim? All humanity is merely grass, all its kindness like wildflowers. The grass dries up, the flower fades, when a wind from Yudhevavah blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass dries up, the flower fades, but the word of our Elohim will stand forever. When this happens, and the glory of Yudhevavah is revealed in Israel, it will be revealed to the entire humankind, and they will all see it together, because Yudhevavah has spoken. And then he will proclaim that man is temporary, and that man is mortal, and that he will disappear. And everything will dry up, but the word of Yudhevavah, the word of Yudhevavah, Yeshua, the word of Yudhevavah, the law of Yudhevavah will stand forever. You who bring good news to Zion, get yourself up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, cry out at the top of your voice. Don't be afraid to shout out loud. Say to the cities of Yehuda, here is your Elohim. When this happens, the word of Yudhevavah will stand forever, and Yeshua will return. So it will be Elohim, he who is returning. And this is the good news, that it is the good news to Jerusalem which is to be cried out loudly and should be shouted out loudly, saying to the cities of Judah, here is your Elohim, here is your God, here is your Messiah, here is the one whom you have expected, because you have paid doubly for your sin. Yudhevavah's plan is Ruach HaKodesh. Acts 1 verses 6 to 8. When they were together, they asked him, that is Yeshua, Yudhevavah, are you at this time going to restore self-rule to Israel? He answered, you don't need to know the dates or the times. The Father has kept these under his own authority. So that they wanted to know whether this would be the time at which the Roman oppression of Israel would end and self-rule would come to Israel. But he answered that they needn't know the dates or times. So he wasn't saying that he didn't know the dates or times. He was saying you do not need to know the dates or times, because the Father has kept these under his own authority. But he also is the Father himself. So he has kept it under his own authority and refused to give the information through to them. But they would receive power when Ruach HaKodesh comes upon them, so that they would be witnesses in Jerusalem, at home, Yehuda, close to home, but in the family, and Shomron, those who seem to have the correct faith, and to the ends of the earth. So it means that this message of salvation was to go to everyone, and then the end will come, as Yeshua had previously said. In the days of Herod, king of Yehuda, there was a Kohen named Zachariah who belonged to the Aviyah division. His wife was a descendant of Aharon, and her name was Elisheva. This is how Yeshua is the fulfillment of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's promises that he made to Chava, to Eve, right at the beginning, and he will crush your head and you will crush his heel. So there was a Kohen, Zechariah, Yah has remembered, who belonged to the order of Aviyah, the father of Yah, because it was the time for the father of Yah, the father of Messiah, to be revealed. His wife was a descendant of Aharon, and her name was Elisheva, the oath of Elohim. Eli, short for Elohim, Sheva, 7, which is an oath. So this means that Yahuwah was planning to remember his oath to bring the father of Yah around, in other words, to bring about the birth of Messiah. Now then, let's have a look at when this was. Look at the temple service orders, because it's interesting to look here. The first lot was drawn for whoever, the 7th for Hakots, the 8th for Aviyah. So we know that Zechariah belonged to the order of Aviyah, and then we know that the 7th order was Hakots, and Hakots means thorny. So before the father of Yah came, people were thorny. They were affected by the fall in sin still. And the 8th was Aviyah, the father of Yah, had come. And then the 9th was for Yeshua. So it was Yeshua, it was salvation that this was about, because he came around as a result of the father of Yah. Zechariah was praying. One time, when Zechariah was fulfilling his duties as Kohen during his division's period of service before Elohim, he was chosen by lot according to the custom among the Kohanim, the priests, to enter the temple and burn incense. So it was his turn to go and burn incense because he had been chosen by the lot. So Yah has remembered, was sent into the temple to go and pray and to bring the incense sacrifice. All the people were outside praying at the time of the incense burning, when there appeared to him an angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh standing to the right of the incense altar. So here was the angel standing to the right of the incense altar. The angel was there to speak to him. And this is incredible. All the people were outside praying at the time of the incense burning, when there appeared to him an angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh standing to the right of the incense altar. Zechariah was startled and terrified at the sight. So here was the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, an angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. The question is, it doesn't say the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, so it doesn't specifically say that this is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh speaking, but this is the angel speaking, and therefore this was not Yeshua himself. But the angel said to him, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. Don't be afraid. Yah has remembered, because your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elisheva, Elizabeth, the oath of Elohim. Yah has remembered his oath, will bear you a son, and you are to name him Yochanan." Now, which oath is this? This is the oath that was made to Eve, to Chava, in the paradise, when she heard that the snake was told that he will crush your head and you will crush his heel. So this is the promise that was to be fulfilled. It was not necessarily Yochanan, but Yochanan was the forerunner of the Messiah, and therefore was incredibly important in this context. He will be a delight to you, and many people will rejoice when he is born, for he will be great in the sight of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. He is never to drink wine or other liquor, and he will be filled with Ruach HaKodesh, even from his mother's womb. So Yochanan would come, and he would be something extremely special, and he would have to be a Nazarite, because he is never to drink wine or other liquor, and this means that the command was given that he should be a Nazarite for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. He will turn many of the people of Israel to their Elohim. He will go out ahead of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in the spirit and power of Eliyahu, to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh a people prepared. So this Eliyahu, this prophet who was prophesied in Malachi and also in Isaiah, would turn many of the people of Israel to their Elohim. They would turn to their Elohim, to their Father, and he would go out ahead of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in the spirit and power of Eliyahu, and turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh a people prepared. So that he would go ahead and he would actually turn Israel to Elohim, and then turn the children and their fathers to each other, so that they would also hear the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you are to love him with your whole heart, your whole soul, and with all your resources. And you are to write these laws on your hearts, and you are to teach them to your children, when you sit down and when you go, when you lie down and when you get up. So there's this whole thing of the children and the fathers, of teaching them the ways of Elohim, and teaching the ways of Elohim, and teaching them the wisdom of Elohim makes them righteous. And then Zechariah said to the angel, how can I be sure of this? For I am an old man. My wife too is well off in her years. So that the angel brought this message to Zechariah, and Zechariah then reacted in this way, that he said, how is this possible? I'm old. My wife also is old. How is it possible that we can still have a child? Let's look at Malachi, the angel's message. Malachi 3, verse 1 to 4. Look, I'm sending my messenger to clear the way before me, and the master whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. The master whom you seek? Yeshua. Yes, the messenger of the covenant in which you take such delight. Look, here he comes, says Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Tzavaot. But who can endure the day when he comes? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire, like the soap maker's lye. So he will refine and he will clean. He will sit, testing and purifying the silver. He will purify the sons of Levi, refining them like gold and silver, so that they can bring offerings to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh uprightly. Now, how did one refine gold at that stage? The person refining the gold melted down the silver, and then actually scooped the dross off until he could see his own face in the silver or the gold. So this is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh refining them so that he can see himself in them, and then they will be upright. They will then be in righteousness, because Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is righteous, and therefore being like him is being righteous. Then the offering of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, of Yehuda and Jerusalem, will be pleasing to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, as it was in the days of old, as in years gone by. So they would then bring this offering as they should be. So it would be as it was in the old days. And then Malachi 4, verses 4 to 6. Remember the Torah of Moshe my servant, which I enjoined on him at Horeb, laws and rulings for all Israel. Look, I will send to you Eliyahu the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So Eliyahu, the prophet, would come before the great and terrible day of Yud He Vav He, and he would turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Otherwise I will come and strike the land with complete destruction. The concept, turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. So the fathers will teach their children and the children will learn from their fathers, will honor them by learning from them. The alternative is that God would strike them. Look, I will send to you Eliyahu, the prophet, before the coming of the great and terrible day of Yud He Vav He. So he said that Eliyahu would come before this great and terrible day of Yud He Vav He. Malachi and the angel's message. Now we look at Luke 1 verse 19 to 22. I am Gabriel, the angel answered him. This is Joseph, and I stand in the presence of Elohim. I was sent to speak to you, to give you this good news. But because you didn't believe what I said, which will be fulfilled when the time comes, you will be silent, unable to speak until the day these things take place. So then Zechariah, Yah has remembered, got a sign from the angel, and the sign was that he was to be mute, would not be able to speak, would be unable to speak until the day that these things take place. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah, for Yah has remembered, and they were surprised that he's taking so long in the temple. But when he came out, unable to talk to them, they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple. Speechless, he communicated to them with signs. So he couldn't really do anything else. He had to use signs to communicate with him because he was dumb. Luke 1, 23 to 25. When the period of his temple service was over, he returned home. Following this, Elisheva, his wife, conceived, and she remained 5 months in seclusion, saying, Yud He Vav He has done this for me. He has shown me favor at this time so as to remove my public disgrace. So the oath of Elohim became pregnant, and she was 5 months in seclusion. And then she was very happy and said that her public disgrace had been removed from her because her barrenness had come to an end. In the 6th month, so the month after she ended her seclusion, the angel Gabriel was sent by Elohim to a city in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man called Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Miriam. So the virgin came to a man, and the name of the man was Joseph. Now this is highly significant because Joseph reminds immediately of Joseph, the spiritual head of the household of Jacob, of Israel. And he became a suffering servant. He was cast into a well, and he was sold as a slave. He worked for Potiphar. He landed in jail, and then he was brought out of jail, and he was elevated virtually to the position of the king of Egypt. So he was the suffering servant. So this is actually saying that he is to be son of Joseph, son of the suffering servant of the house of David, David the reigning king. He was to be a son of David eventually, the reigning king. So before he could become a reigning king, he had to be a suffering servant. And the virgin's name was Miriam. Miriam, bitterness. Bitterness, the result of sin. And approaching her, the angel said, Shalom, favored lady, Yud He Vav He is with you. Shalom, may there be perfection in every facet of your life, because Yud He Vav He is with you. Approaching her, the angel said, Shalom, favored lady, Yud He Vav He is with you. She was deeply troubled by his words and wondered what kind of greeting this may be. The angel said to her, Don't be afraid, Miriam, for you have found favor with Elohim. Look, you will become pregnant, you will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Yeshua. Yeshua, salvation. So the whole promise of the salvation of Israel, the salvation that comes from the turning of the hearts of the father to the children and the hearts of the children to the father, God to Israel and Israel to God, and the Israelites to their children and the children to the Israelites. And this was to be the salvation of the entire Israel. He will be great. He will be called Son of Ha-Elyon, the Most High, the Son of God, the Son of the magnificent King, the Lord of heaven and earth. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim will give him the throne of his forefather David. So he would be Son of David, reigning on David's throne forever, because the Son of David is the Messiah, and he will rule the house of Yaakov forever. Yaakov, the ankle grabber, the cheat, the one who was chosen by Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh to become Israel. He was made Yaakov and formed Israel, and he will rule that house forever. There will be no end to his kingdom. How can this be? Asked Miriam of the angel, since I am a virgin. She couldn't understand this pregnancy, and the angel answered her, Ruach HaKodesh will come over you. The power of Ha-Elyon, the Most High, will cover you. Ha-Elyon, Ruach HaKodesh are identical with each other. Therefore, the Holy Child born to you will be called Son of Elohim. So he would be Son of Elohim in person and nobody else. You have a relative, Elisheva, who is an old woman, and everyone says she is barren, but she has conceived a son and is 6 months pregnant. So here was a supernatural pregnancy again, another one, that of a barren woman who had become pregnant, as was Miriam herself, who had not been with a man, and yet she was pregnant. For with Elohim nothing is impossible. Miriam said, I am a servant of Yahuwah. May it happen to me as you have said. Then the angel left her. So she said, okay, that's good with me. Without delay, Miriam set out and hurried to the town in the hill country of Yehuda where Zechariah lived, entered his house and greeted Elisheva. So bitterness, sinfulness, because all bitterness is the result of sin. She set out and hurried to Zechariah. Yah has remembered. Yah has remembered also her bitterness, but the bitterness of mankind, the bitterness that comes from the fall in sin. And then she greeted Elisheva, the oath of Elohim, when she got there. When Elisheva, the oath of Elohim, heard Miriam's greeting, heard bitterness's greeting, the baby in her womb stirred, and Elisheva was filled with Ruach HaKodesh and spoke up in a loud voice. So Elisheva, the oath of Elohim, had this baby in her womb stir, and she realized that there's something very special that had now happened. And she spoke up in a loud voice, how blessed are you among women, and how blessed is the child in your womb. How blessed are you, how blessed is your child, how blessed is Yeshua, how blessed is bitterness, because to bitterness is to be born Yeshua. There is to be born salvation, salvation from bitterness. But who am I that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For as soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. The baby had woken up, had leaped for joy in Elisheva's womb, in the oath of Elohim's womb. Indeed, you are blessed. Indeed, you are blessed. You are blessed because you have trusted that the promise Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has made to you will be fulfilled. So the promise that has been made to Miriam, the same promise that was made to Chava, to Eve, that he would come who would crush the head of the serpent, and that not only would he crush the head of the serpent, but he would also be bitten in his heel. So in the place of the sin that he had taken onto himself, because this is the work that Yeshua had come to do. Then Miriam started magnifying the Lord. She said, "My soul magnifies Yudhevave. He makes him great, and my spirit rejoices in Elohim, my Savior, my Yeshua." So her spirit rejoices in Elohim, her Yeshua, who is inside her, who is her baby, who has taken notice of his servant girl in her humble position. For, imagine it, from now on, all generations will call me blessed. All generations would bless her for the fact that she had given birth to Yeshua. The Mighty One has done great things for her. Indeed, his name is holy. So the Mighty One has done magnificent things for Miriam, and his name is holy. And in every generation he has mercy on those who fear him. In every generation he actually shows his grace to those who fear him, those who love him, and he gives his Ruach HaKodesh to them. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm, routed the secretly proud. So he has done mighty things, but he has gotten rid of those who are proud. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but raised up the humble. Yudhevave raises those who are humble, but he opposes and he hates those who are arrogant. He fills the hungry with good things, but sent the rich away empty. Those who are empty he filled with good things and sent the rich away. He has taken part, the part of his servant Israel, mindful of the mercy which he promised to our fathers, to Avram and his seed forever. So he promised this to the fathers. He promised that there would be salvation, that there would be a Messiah come. And this he promised to Avram and his seed forever, because Avram is the father of all. So Miriam stayed with Elisheva for about 3 months until her pregnancy was full term, and then returned home. But it seems that she left before Yochanan was born. The time arrived for Elisheva to have her baby, for Elisheva, for the oath of Elohim, to give birth to her baby. And she gave birth to her sons. Her neighbors and relatives heard how good Yudhevave had been to her, and they rejoiced with her. Everyone was happy for her, for the fact that Yudhevave had given her a son. Someone to comfort her for the fact that she had not had any children. On the 8th day, they came to do the child's Brit Milah, circumcision. So the circumcision on the 8th day, which does not exist in the physical realm because there are only 7 days in a week, it therefore exists only in heaven, and this means that it prepares the young man to live in the heavenly dimension because he has been circumcised, his sin has been cut away. And they were about to call him Zechariah, because that was his father's name. Yah has remembered. But then his mother spoke up and said, "No, he's to be called Yochanan, the grace of Yudhevave." But the people were not happy with this, because they said, "None of your relatives have that name." And they made signs to his father to find out what he wanted him called. He motioned for a writing tablet, and to everyone's surprise, he wrote, "His name is Yochanan. His name is the grace of Yudhevave, because he is the precursor of the Lord. It is the grace of Yudhevave who brings the Lord close." At that moment, his power of speech returned, and his first words were a bracha to Elohim. So, the minute he did what Yudhevave wanted him to do, and he pronounced that his name is to be Yochanan, the grace of Yudhevave, he was within the will of Yudhevave, and his speech returned. So his muteness was taken away. And his first words were a blessing to Yudhevave. "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe." And all their neighbors were awestruck. And throughout the hill country of Judah, people talked about all these things. So everyone was wondering what was going to happen here, because there is something marvelous that has happened. And everyone who heard of them said to himself, what is this child going to be? There's something very special about this child, but what is it? For clearly the hand of Yudhevaveh was with him. Yudhevaveh was with this child, with his father. Yah has remembered. He was with the child, the grace of Yudhevaveh, and with his mother, the oath of Elohim. His father Zechariah, Yah has remembered, was filled with Ruach HaKodesh and spoke this prophecy. So it is God himself who spoke through him and said, praised be Yudhevaveh, the Elohim of Israel, because he has visited and made a ransom to liberate his people. He had made this ransom to liberate his people, to Yeshua his people, by raising up for us a mighty deliverer. A mighty Yeshua is a descendant of his servant David. So he would be the deliverer. He would be the suffering servant who would deliver, but eventually would become the king on David's throne. It is just as he has spoken through the mouth of the prophets from the very beginning. He has spoken and said this through the prophets, that we should be delivered from our enemies, that we should be assured from our enemies and from the power of all who hate us. So he was announcing that that his son Yochanan was the forerunner of this one, who was to deliver them from the evil. This has happened so that he might show the mercy promised to our fathers, that he would remember his holy covenant. He would show the mercy promised to our fathers. He would show his oath, his Elisheva promised to our fathers. And he would remember his holy covenant. Yudhevaveh would, Zechariah, remember his holy covenant. The oath he swore before Abraham, our father, the oath who is Elisheva, and to whom Elisheva's name refers, before Abraham our father. Even before Abraham our father, he swore it to Chava, to Eve, to grant us that we, freed from our enemies, would serve him without fear. Fearlessness would be what would come over Israel, and they would be able to fear him in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. So they would be able to fear Yudhevaveh and would be able to serve him in holiness and righteousness, because he had brought Ruach HaKodesh over them, and Ruach HaKodesh would lead them into holiness. You, child, will be called a prophet of Ha-Elyon. You will go before Yudhevaveh to prepare his way. Here he was saying what Yochanan was saying about Yochanan the Immerser, that he was the prophet who was to prepare the way for Yeshua. He was Eliyahu, if you will, who will go before Yudhevaveh to prepare his way by spreading the knowledge amongst his people. Spreading the knowledge among his people that deliverance comes by having sins forgiven. So he was actually telling them that what Yeshua was about is about this deliverance that was to come through having sins forgiven. And sins forgiven comes through the cross, comes through Yeshua's execution, through our Elohim's most tender mercy. Through Elohim's most tender mercy, Yochanan, Elohim, Yahuwah, mercy, Hanan, Yahochanan, which causes the sunrise to visit us from heaven. The sunrise, Yeshua, the sunrise of Yudhevaveh, to shine on those in darkness, because he is the light shining on those in darkness, those delivered to Satan, living in the shadow of death, because those living in Satan's darkness and in his evil are delivered to death, and to guide our feet into the paths of peace, because Israel was to walk in peace with their Elohim. and their feet were to be guided so that they walk in these paths of peace, these halakha of peace, this way of walking, this way of believing, of peace, of shalom, of perfection in every facet of their lives. The child grew and became strong in spirit, and he lived in the wilderness until the time came for him to appear in public to Israel. So he was out of the public eye until such time as it became time to appear to Israel. Let us look at Yeshua's genealogy. Uzziyahu, the power of Yudhevave, was the father of Yotam. Yotam was the father of Achaz. Achaz was the father of Hizkiah. Hizkiyahu was the father of Menashe. Menashe was the father of Ammon. Ammon was the father of Yoshiyahu. Just Yeshua's name turned around. Yehoshua. Yoshiyahu was the father of Yechanyahu, and his fathers all the time of the exile to Babel, so up to the Babylonian exile. Then after the Babylonian exile, Yechanyahu was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel means he who flowed out of Babylon. So from the power of Yudhevave came the one who eventually flowed out of Babylon and came back to Israel to rebuild the walls and to rebuild the temple. Zerubbabel was the father of Abihud, the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azur, Azur the father of Tzadok, righteous. Tzadok, righteous, was the father of Yachin, upright. Yachin, upright, was the father of Elichud. Elichud was the father of Elazar, Elohim's help. Elohim's help was the father of Matan, help. Given was the father of Yaakov. Here we are back at the name of the Archfather that is derived from Ekev, as we discussed earlier. The ankle grabber, the cheat, the supplanter, who eventually became Israel. And Yaakov, the father of Yosef, the father of Yeshua. So this actually points in the direction of Yaakov, the son of Isaac. And his son, the spiritual one, was Yosef, the spiritual leader of his household, because he said that the sun and the moon and the 11 stars would bow before him, the husband of Miriam. So the father of Israel, because he was made Yaakov and he was formed Israel, and his son Yosef, let him add. Yeshua was the son of Yosef, of the suffering servant, who suffered for Israel, the husband of Miriam of bitterness, because he was the suffering servant for this bitterness, from whom was born Yeshua, who was called the Messiah. So Yeshua, the one who saves, was born from Miriam. The pregnancy and birth of Yeshua, as according to Matthew. Matityahu 1 verse 18 to 19. Here is how the birth of Yeshua the Messiah took place. When his mother Miriam, bitterness, was engaged to Yosef, let him add, the suffering servant, before they were married, she was found to be pregnant from Ruach HaKodesh. So she was pregnant from Ruach HaKodesh. But this was a problem, because her husband clearly had a problem when she became pregnant, because what was this? Her husband to be Yosef was a man who did what was right. So he was righteous, so he made plans to break the engagement quietly rather than to put her to public shame. Yosef was a righteous man, and he did not want to expose Miriam as having cheated on him, because that was the obvious deduction of her being pregnant without him ever having slept. But while he was thinking about this, an angel of Yudhevave appeared to him in a dream and said, Yosef, and Yosef was the suffering servant, son of David, and David is the reigning king, suffering servant, the son of the reigning king. Do not be afraid to take bitterness into your home with you as your wife, for what has been conceived in her is from Ruach HaKodesh. It is holy. She will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Yeshua. You are to name him Yeshua, which means Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, saves. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yeshua's, because he will Yeshua his people from their sins. So you see, the giving of the name was actually affirmed by the speaking of the angel, who actually expounded this name Yeshua in everything he said. All this happened in order to fulfill what Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and bear a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, God with us. The name means Elohim is with us, because he was Elohim in person, and therefore he was Elohim with Israel. When Yosef awoke, he did what the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had told him to do. He took Miriam home to be his wife, but he did not have sexual relationships with her until she had given birth to a son, and he named him Yeshua, because that is what both he and Miriam had been commanded to call the son, the Savior, Yeshua. So Yosef, the suffering servant, and Miriam, bitterness, went to the house of bread, Beit Lechem, for the birth. Around this time, Emperor Augustus issued an order for a census to be taken throughout the empire. This registration, the first of its kind, took place when Cyrenius was governing in Syria, and everyone went to be registered, each to his own town. So Yosef, because he was a descendant of David, went up from the town in Nazareth in the Galilee, to the town of David. So the suffering servant went to the town of the reigning king, because the suffering servant would become the reigning king, called Beit Lechem, the house of bread, because the suffering servant was to be the bread of life, because man will not live of bread alone, but from every word that passes from the word of Elohim in Bethlehem in Yehuda, to be registered. So he went there to be registered with Miriam, to whom he was engaged and who was pregnant. So he did exactly as he was ordered, and as he was ordered by the king, and therefore he went to the house of bread to take the one who would eventually become the word of God, who would become the words of God that proceed from his mouth as bread of life, as spiritual bread for people. He was to take to the house of bread. According to Jonathan Kahn, the shepherds were only out at night during the lambing season. And this is significant because the lambs are born in spring, and spring is in Nisan, in Aviv. Messiah is the Lamb of Elohim, and therefore it made sense for him to be born in the month of Nisan. The lambs were for the temple sacrifice. They were for the Passover sacrifice. These were the sacrificial lambs for Passover. When the lamb was a year old, which was the time of his birth and also the time of his death, this also means that Yeshua was born and died in the same month. So the central events of his life all fell on Jewish high holidays. The lambs were to be taken into the houses on the 10th. Now, it is said that Yeshua went to Jerusalem in the book of John 12, 6 days before the feast. 6 days before the feast, the first day of unleavened bread is the 15th, is the 9th. And therefore, the first day that he spent in Lazarus' home was the 10th, when his feet were anointed, when his motive to die was anointed. The next day, he entered Jerusalem on the back of a donkey as a a reigning king, as a victorious king. So then he was accepted by those people as the son of David. So he was accepted and anointed both as the son of Joseph and the son of David. With these two, the Feast of First Fruits occurs on the first Sabbath after Passover, and this is the Feast of Abikurim, of First Fruits. Yeshua was the first fruits out of the death, and then on Pentecost, Ruach HaKodesh was shed forth as a result of the fact that he had died and had been resurrected from the dead. Yeshua is to return during Sukkot as the Messiah, because the Messiah is expected during Sukkot, during Tabernacles. The first of Nisan is the beginning of the Jewish holy year, of the Jewish spiritual year. As we've already said, the first of Tishri is the beginning of the secular year. On the moon calendar, he died at full moon. This was on Nisan the 14th and the 15th. The Magi were prophesied in the book of Isaiah. They would come with gold and frankincense. Let us inspect how they knew to come. They saw a star, but this star was not was a constellation rather than a star, because a star could not move, and this actually moved to show them where Messiah was. But the Magi came for the King of the Jews, because all the planets aligned in the constellation of Aries, and Aries is associated with Israel. Therefore, they knew that this was the King of the Jews that was to be born. And this clearly took place in terms of Zechariah being in the temple, and eventually the birth of Yohanan, and then the birth of Messiah. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the calendar of the priestly courses was found, and this coincided with Zechariah being in the temple in time for this to happen. The Talmud and the Dead Sea Scrolls match as far as the priestly courses are concerned. Hippolytus said that the Messiah was born in the month of Nisan or Aviv, and this coincides with what we said. The tabernacle took 9 months to build. Yeshua is the tabernacle, and he was born in Nisan, but his construction actually began 9 months earlier when he was conceived. And this actually places his birthday on the first day of the first month, Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month, the first of the month. And at new moon, because that is when the head of the month occurs. Somehow it is generally accepted that Yeshua had a ministry that lasted for 3.5 years. But if he was born on the 1st of Aviv and died during Aviv, his ministry would have been 3 years. And a birthday in Tishri would be in line with 3.5 years. But this period of 3.5 years is a deduction rather than fact, because one cannot deduce it from the scriptures.